yesterday, I believe, Elon Musk said that he has a super bad feeling about the economy. And we're trying to figure out what he's looking at. We know his own sales were up. Tesla sales in the month of May, I believe, were up globally 60%, and almost every other auto manufacturer sales were down, and some of them down by a lot. So it's not his own sales, except perhaps at the margin, maybe something that he's seeing in orders. He may be reflecting on the decline in total auto sales. And so that's interesting. Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan talked about a hurricane. Be prepared for a hurricane. He doesn't know what kind of hurricane. Is it going to be a mild one, or is it going to be a Hurricane Sandy, which would be quite serious? But I think he's changed his tune a bit in the last month since JP Morgan reported earnings. So what is he saying? Well, he sees a lot of business activity and must see it slowing down, if I had to guess. And the president of Goldman described this environment as a confluence of shocks that in his career has been unprecedented. So again, he has a very good perspective, global perspective, every sector. And so I would say at the margin, these three business leaders are seeing the economy in some form of stress. Now, one of the issues we've been focused on with you on this video is the inventory buildup that was likely, and we'd been saying that through the last year, and it took a while to get through some of the supply chain issues, but now we are seeing inventory increases, the likes of which I have never seen in my career, and I'm talking about on a company by company basis. So Walmart, as Nancy and I mentioned in this last YouTube video, Walmart sales up 3% on a comparable store basis year over year, which means they were probably down in unit terms. Inventory is up 33%, which probably means in real terms, taking away inflation, they were up 25 to 30%. Well, that's interesting because more than half of Walmart's sales are in groceries, and you're not going to see huge inventory buildups in groceries. And so what does this say for the other half? Are their inventories 80%? You know, it's kind of crazy to think that that's a possibility, but it's a possibility. And Target's inventories were up 42%. Now it has less in the way of groceries as a share of the total. So 42%, maybe if you X groceries, was up 50 to 60%. These are crazy numbers for two of the best managed companies from a supply chain management point of view in the world. And so maybe a Jamie Dimon is starting to see this backing up in other ways in terms of the way the information he has. Another very interesting story recently, this was in the Wall Street Journal, was one of the big Amazon seller aggregators. So basically pulling together a bunch of smaller sellers and aggregating them onto the Amazon network from a third-party point of view. In January of this year, this aggregator had planned to go public. It had such a booming conditions during COVID that it felt that, you know, this was a shift that would continue and that it could go public, and wanted to go public in order to continue to aggregate the seller ecosystem for Amazon. Well, he, instead of going public, the CEO decided the market conditions were a little hostile, but he still went ahead with the party he had planned in January. And so brought a bunch of the sellers down to Mexico. And I guess they were feeling very confident in January. Well, guess what? Just recently, that CEO was let go. They will not go public, and they may be in trouble, and they may be in too much debt. Again, so much confidence during COVID that, his business would continue to boom. So even the Amazon seller ecosystem, and these are third-party sellers, which are more than half of all of Amazon sales, even they are having problem after years of taking massive share from the brick and mortar retailers. So just thought that was an interesting story. And surprisingly, auto sales. Now, the auto manufacturers finally are getting through supply chain issues. And according to Wards, their plans were to increase production, or they're in the midst of increasing production, to something like 20% this quarter. And what we got this week was kind of surprising. Auto sales dropped back down from 14.3 million. Now, steady state is 17 million, so they had not even gotten back to steady state, which is 17 to 18 million. And that's an annualized unit rate per year for the U.S. So 14.3, and the expectation was that would just continue on up to a more normalized rate. Well, instead, in May, it appears auto sales dropped 12.7. So here we are again. If they build the inventory and the consumer does not come, in fact, the consumer retrenches, these companies are going to have too much inventory. What a surprise, given all the supply chain issues we've been hearing about. Now, today is Employment Friday. This is why we do this video on this Friday. There's a lot of information in the employment report. So today's employment report, the non-farm payroll was a little stronger than expected, an increase of 390,000 in non-farm payroll jobs. And if we're right, then the employment gains should be slowing down quite dramatically here, and they are slowing down. They're not in the 500 to 800,000 range per month. They are down below 400,000 now, and we think they'll continue to move down, if not negative, by the end of this year. But they are stronger than I would have expected, and as we've mentioned here before, one of the possibilities might be so many employers had been experiencing work shortages, labor shortages, that now that they're able to get the labor, they're saying, okay, even though my business is slowing down, I want to make sure I'm ready for the next cycle. So that could be what's going on. What's interesting is average hourly earnings, again, another very important inflation indicator. Average hourly earnings were up 0.3% in this last month. Expectations, 0.4%. So the year-over-year rate has gone from 5.5% to 5.2%. So again, this should assuage the Fed's concerns that we're moving into a wage price spiral. The inflation rates that we've seen in the last year do not seem to be getting into wages in a permanent way. What we did see for a while there were because of the labor shortages, wages going up to bring people out of their homes after COVID and back into the labor force. The labor force participation rate did tick up a bit after falling the previous month. The only variables in the report that I don't think got enough attention by the press and economists out there, really there are two. In the manufacturing sector, the number of the gain in employment was about half that expected, 18,000, I think 39,000 was expected. The other thing that I didn't see any mention was the work week, the average work week in the manufacturing sector went down, and overtime went down. So I think this is the first indication that we're seeing that inventories are piling up, and the manufacturing sector is beginning to retrench. The other thing we saw, and this makes sense given what I just mentioned about Walmart and Target, is the number of retail jobs dropped by 61,000. That's a pretty big drop. And then using Nancy Lazar's, so Piper Sandler's numbers, they are tallying up the number of hiring freezes and layoffs companies are announcing. And in total, since February, 61 companies, this is US-based, have announced freezes or layoffs. And just yesterday, as you probably know, Tesla said that it was going to lay off 10% of its workforce. Today, it clarified that it's not the manufacturing part of the labor force, it is the white collar. So that's pretty interesting as well. Now, the consumption indicators that have come out over the last month are quite confusing. And we've given you some of the micro with Walmart and Target and Amazon. If you look at the macro numbers that came out, personal consumption expenditures for April came out at 0.9%. That's nominal, so that includes inflation. Excluding inflation, 0.7%. So that was a pretty strong report after a great degree of sluggishness. The reason it's surprising is we also got the University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index, and it fell. It fell to a new low, and we're back to where we were in 08, 09. So that is not a good place, and it's hard to understand why consumers would be spending so much. The other confusing statistic to me is consumer credit, the change in consumer credit outstanding. Now, this includes both revolving, so credit cards, and installment debt. And these are huge numbers for March and April, 37 billion and 52 billion. Normally, we're used to seeing 6 billion or 5 billion. Now, I have seen this before at turning points in the cycle when consumers or small businesses, probably more the latter, but applying as consumers, they are worried about their ability to get credit in the future. So they take down their credit lines. And we're wondering if that's part of what's going on right now. The other puzzle here is the consumer saving rate, which peaked at, I believe, 34% in April or May of 2020, dropped and has been revised down and has dropped to 4.4%. So pre-COVID, we were at 8%. We're down to 4.4%, and we haven't seen that level since 8, right around the time Lehman went bankrupt. So it's confusing. The combination of sentiment and savings, low savings, very low sentiment, the consumer would not seem to be in a spending mood. So we shall see. These statistics are often revised. 1 month does not a trend make either. But that is a bit of a disconnect for us. We're also seeing housing, all kinds of housing metrics going south now. Affordability has collapsed. A combination of a significant increase in mortgage rates and pricing is pricing consumers out of the market, and consumer sentiment, I'm sure, is not helping the situation. I mentioned autos, so you've got housing and autos, two of the most cyclical parts of the economy, going down right now. The used car sales, I should also mention, are down about 20% year over year. Now we're seeing new car sales down sequentially, and they're down also more than 20% on a year over year basis. These are big declines. So we think that's going to start backing up into the price of used cars, which will then in turn back up into the secured credit instruments out there backed by used cars. The residual value of used cars and new cars will be going down if we're right and the economy is as weak as these sectors are suggesting. And now